Good morning. This is the Blaine's World webcast that can be found each week on Facebook, YouTube, and LinkedIn. You can also find us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. You get more information, find out about past shows at my website behind me, which is blainesworld.net. I'm your host, Blaine Greenfield, and I'm here in my Zoom studio in lovely downtown Fairview, North Carolina. And each week we talk about different things and different people, and I try to strive to talk about positive news and information about people and organizations in both Western North Carolina and throughout the country. And toward that end, it's my pleasure to introduce author Neal Bendesky. And Neal, you read my mind. I'll have you wave to all your fans and friends who are watching this. And Neal, as you'll see, is one of the most positive guys you'll ever come across. Neal is a Phoenix resident, and he likes to joke he's half the man he used to be. That's a great line. That's because he used to weigh 450 pounds before losing 261 pounds during what he calls a miracle run in which he overcame sudden cardio death and a bout with cancer. And Neal, you telling me off the air also ties into the hat you're wearing. If you show the hat you're wearing and that's the 199 guy. And that was your nickname, the 199 guy?
Well, that was, as we discussed off air, that was a theme that, because in the beginning of this, all those things are great. You got a great audience. First of all, thank you for having me on your show. I enjoy doing my homework about your show, Blaine, and shout out to our dear friend, Harry Menta, from Plainfield, New Jersey. And we'll get into that a little bit later. But look, at the end of the day, I was a sports marketing guy that was a prisoner of my job. I was 1 foot in the grave, over 400 pounds, and I didn't know where I was going to go. So, motivation is what gets you started. And that's what I hope in the beginning of this conversation, we motivate people to listen and to understand that, it's never too late. I'm 67. It's never too late to reimagine your lifestyle and live that energy that you could deal with, and deal with sudden cardiac death, or in my recent case, cancer. When you put yourself in a position to respond, and you could do it, and you could smile, and you could show gratitude, love it.
Well, and you surely are smiling and showing that gratitude. I should also mention that you're a longtime sports marketing executive who enjoys walking and running in local races since his weight loss. He's now a motivational speaker and author of a self-help book. If you just hold it up, or you can point it out, the self-help book, Never Too Late, How Lifestyle Reimagination Can Save Your Life. And that's the book, and we'll be talking about it in just a second. And before I actually talk about the book, I like finding out about my guests. And you mentioned that you grew up in Plainfield, New Jersey, not too far from where I taught in South River, New Jersey. And so the question is, Neal, as a kid growing up, did you always know you wanted to be a sports marketing guy?
Well, early in my life, I was a decent tennis player.
Okay.
But beyond that, I wasn't going to get on the field, to make it my career. So I developed an interest in sports marketing and sales. So like you did, it sounds like you did some of the same things. I was a public address announcer. I had a radio show. I had my own column in the local community paper. So those type of things, helped me. And then I got a scholarship, right? So, Monmouth College,
Sure.
now I think it's called Monmouth University now. So my high school football coach, Milt Theodosidis, he did something kind of unique back in the day where he had a contact football camp, and he would, he said, Neal, I want you as a manager, to come help set up the field and, do the things that we're going to do. And I did. And I kind of woke up one day and said, wait a minute, those coaches are like actors, they're going to work hard and play hard. Right. And so I said, they probably don't want to get up for breakfast. So I would go and set up the dummies and all that stuff around the field. Then I would go to the cafeteria and get like a pot of coffee and donuts, and I would bring it to the coaches. Well, that endeared me to two coaches from the University of Cincinnati. And Blaine, I got a scholarship as a student manager for the football team initially, and then they hired a college, a Chicago Bulls coach. His name was Ed Badger. He's from New Jersey. And he took a liking to me, and I became a manager for him. And that led to me getting, my master's and working as an intern for ABA USA. Now it's called Olympic basketball in Colorado Springs. That's where I met my wife. That's my gold medal. So, at the end of the day, this non-athletic guy, me, found a way to get involved with sports. And now it's a big business. And, like you do and have done, you teach. I teach at Boston College, so I'm able to give back, which is a big part of like what you do with the show.
By the way, I have to jump in since you mentioned your wife. And your wife's name is what?
Laura.
Okay, and Laura, if you're listening to this, I have to ask you, I'm going to put you on the spot here, Neal, if I can. I'm going to ask you a very personal question, if I can. And so you've been married to Laura, I assume, for a while. Can I ask you, how many years have you been married to Laura?
Not long enough. Over 40
Wait. Can I use that line? Not long enough?
Blaine, that's your line, baby.
No, I'm going to give you credit for it. What a line. I was going to steal it from you. Laura, what a prince you're married to. This guy, I can't believe you said that, Neal. Thank you for sharing that with me and I was listening to it.
You're welcome.
Not long enough. I got to remember that. I'll give you credit in the future. So you met Laura, interesting, through sports marketing. And so that became your career after you graduated college, excuse me. You then went into sports marketing, I guess, on a full-time basis?
Yeah, it was interesting. I was working at the Olympic Training Center. Behind me is a picture of Michael Jordan when he was trying out for the 83 Pan American team. And then, it was in North Carolina, of course, him and Sam Perkins. And my wife calls me up and says, I got to go pick up these two tall guys. Can you come with me? And here's wild. We're in Colorado Springs. It's about 8:30. There's nothing open, in Sea Springs, right? So Michael wanted a hamburger, right? So I think IHOP was the only thing that was open. And we took Michael Jordan and Sam Perkins to an IHOP, right? And it led to a friendship that we had with MJ, that lasted a long time. But bigger picture than that is that it led me to an opportunity to work in '84. That's Jim Valvano, the NC State coach that won the national championship. But he, at the time, was working, for ABC Sports. I got a job to work the LA Olympics, sitting on the floor as a statistician. So networking became an important part. I tell my students this at BC all the time. You got to volunteer. You got to go to events. So early in my career, I was building relationships. So here I am announcing at the Olympic Training Center, and there was a great owner recently passed of the upstart Houston Gamblers. And Jerry Argovitz, Dr. Jerry Argovitz was his name. And we go and I write a marketing plan. And one of the other owners, got it, Bernard Lerner, and he said, well, I love the plan. I says, well, if you love the plan, I got no money in my pocket. I go, if you like the plan, then you're going to have to pay to see me. Well, a speakerphone was the big break in my career because Jerry Argovitz heard it. He flew me down, and my first job was with the old USFL Houston Gamblers. We promoted the quarterback, Jim Kelly, which was very exciting. And like I tell people, our 47th president built it and killed it. Okay. In other words, Donald Trump had a team with Herschel Walker and Doug Flutie, you remember, and called the New Jersey Generals. So he wanted Jim Kelly. He had this vision where Arthur Ashe Stadium is now. He wanted to build a dome stadium there. He wanted to get absorbed into the NFL. But we had a lawsuit and we only won $1. With an antitrust suit, it was $3. So we weren't getting very far. So my wife and I are stuck in New Jersey, back home, for me. But, what am I going to do? So I ended up getting my first gig on the college ranks at the University of Cincinnati, where I went to school. So, a lot of big breaks happened from there, and then ended up 23 years in South Florida. My boss from Cincinnati went to Miami, and we were kind of the shepherds, the pioneers of what is now called corporate partnerships, where we got companies to support. Like, when you put on these great theatrical programs, you need companies to write checks, right? Well, sports was no different. And we were at the front end of it when Miami had some very big success on the football field and in the baseball diamond with Coach Ron Frazier. But the bigger picture is they didn't have the money. So we had to figure out a way to make things, work. And we did. And that led to me getting introduced to Wayne Huizinga, who was Mr. Blockbuster Video, right?
Sure.
And he was buying the Marlins. So I got involved with the Marlins next. And then later I became the vice president of the Heat. And then I had my own company doing celebrity events. But all along the way, I'm working in an office, and I have this saying that fan food, what you go to a ballpark or venue or theater, fan food is not fuel food for somebody like me. So the weight started going on. And at one point I was 450 pounds.
By the way, before we get into that, I have to ask you back up just a little bit and share a story that you shared with me off the air, which is such a great story. I hope anybody listening to it pays attention. But you were telling me also how you got in part your college scholarship, and you got your college scholarship, if I would story right, because not only you were in the right place at the right time, but you used your brain to provide services for people that they weren't getting. And you were talking about getting the coffee and getting the other stuff for people. Just elaborate on that, because it's such a great story, if anybody's listening, how you just make yourself valuable to whoever needs your services.
I mean, nobody asked me to do what I did for Bob Shaw and Bob Valcenti, who were the coaches from Cincinnati.
Right.
But it endeared myself to them that I was hustling. I was going after it. I'm sure you lived through that, scenario. You're not just going to sit back at a job and sit in a desk and be computer smart, and people are going to say, I'm hiring Blaine, I'm hiring Neal. It just doesn't work that way. But, in my particular case, my parents, didn't have a whole bunch of money. My mom was deaf. My father was in retail. So I was the oldest, and I didn't come from, a money situation. So if I wanted to move, if I wanted to get an opportunity, in college, I had to figure out a way. So I tell people, I clean uniforms. I did what I had to do. Now you're going to enjoy this because you're an entrepreneur. So the second year at Cincinnati, I need some money. I'm trying to figure it out, right? So my freshman year, I flew home and I had 3 summer jobs, right? And one of those jobs, was going into New York City and working for Pony Sports. Remember that, like the Nike swoosh, they had the chevron on them. So it was my job to paint the shoes. So one day, the boss at our promotional says to me, hey, we're going to cut all those shoes up and we're going to, we don't need them. They're out of date. I go, out of date. So me being Neal the Deal, basically I shipped the shoes to Ohio and I would sell them. And then that same year, they changed the old AstroTurf at Nippert Stadium, which is one of the oldest stadiums at the University of Cincinnati. And I said, you know what? I'm going to cut the AstroTurf into the size of dorm rooms, and I'm going to sell the carpet, right? And so you do what you got to do when you have a dream. And we all have those ups and downs, just like in my wellness journey, that I've been prepared for. You put yourself in that space, where you really want it. I mean, think about how many theater people in your area, didn't get that lead part or didn't get into that long standing play. And what did they do? They went and worked at a restaurant or something along those lines. So that's kind of what I'm glad my father and mother taught me, is that you got to work for what you want to get.
But what I like the story you told, again, let me see if I have it right, that you then also went out and would get coffee for the coaches, or you get, do things that, and you weren't, I guess, even asked, you just did it automatically?
Yes.
Okay. And just a little thing makes a difference, but it helped you get a college scholarship, because who would ever, to get a college scholarship as a manager of a college team or high school team, who would have thunk, but you did it,
And what was really beautiful about that is there were other student managers, but we developed some lifelong friendships. One of my friends, Joe DeSantis, who's from New Jersey, he was a Rhodes Scholar candidate. My other friend, Ray Galvin, he worked for, in retail for a long time. And now he's with the Alumni Association at the University of Cincinnati. So it's like, it's so beautiful that these things happen. And then one of my other friends is the executive director of Athletes in Action. So, all different areas, when you get involved into a program and you open your eyes and you listen, and granted, I'm doing a lot of talking today, but when you listen to what other people could do and you find things that is important to other people. Like I asked you at the end of our pre-talk before we got on the air, what is important to your audience in terms of, Blaine's World and what we want to accomplish today? Because look, not everybody has 199 pounds to lose, right? Because that was one of my goals, but 10 becomes 20, 20 becomes 30, 40 becomes 50. And all of a sudden you've lived a life, you've worked really hard. And what happens? You can't enjoy it because you haven't put yourself in a position to survive better. And that's what I hope today's call will share, is that I'm just a regular guy, but at the end of the day, by doing things in sports, by doing some entertainment flares, which we'll talk about, and adding value to somebody's experience, all of a sudden I was in some pretty cool places. So, but at the end of the day, I didn't understand nutrition until 10 years ago when, like we talked about, when Jeff Bridges' movie Crazy Heart inspired me.
Well, and talk a little bit about that. So you were mentioning that you had this career, a whole bunch of different kinds of cool stuff in sports, but then one day you're sitting at a desk. And so what motivated you, aside from the Jeff Bridges movie, to realize that you had to do something different?
Thank you for asking. That's a great question, because it's parallel for so many people. Some days you wake up and you don't feel like you have the energy for your life, for your family, for your career. I didn't have those things. Here I am working in sports and I don't look the part. I'm over 400 pounds, right? And I'm not living it the way it was. So there was actually a speaker, Bob Bodine, who wrote a book called The Power of Who. It's a networking book. And he later wrote a book about what his mother told him to do, in developing his relationship and believing in God. Okay. I'm not getting too religious here, but at the end of the day, Two Chairs is a very strong book. And he talks about three things, disruptive questions. He says, number one, okay, does God know your situation? Of course he does. Number two, is it too hard? No. And number three, does he have a plan? So I took that and said, when is somebody going to talk to me to help me get better? So I'm in transition with jobs. My wife and I, Laura and I, moved here with our boys, Justin, who is in the doctorate program at NYU. And our other son is in Paris, France, studying the fragrances. And that's Logan. And they were both organic chemists. So they take after my wife, That's why when you asked me that question, okay, not long enough. I mean, thank God it was long enough, over 40 years, that some of what she had gave the genes to our sons because they're smarter than me. But ultimately, I'm in a space, answering your question, where I felt like I couldn't walk around the block. I thought I was going to die.
By the way, let me jump in here and ask you, since you're talking about it, I understand, or you showed me off there, you have a prop. We can help people realize what space you're in. And you're showing me you had the jeans, still have the jeans?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
So have you ever been to see Omar the tent maker? Okay, right here, baby. Size 62 jeans, right? So this was Neal Bendesky. And oh, by the way, we were the victims of identity theft in 2008. So this guy's a little history. So one of my friends, who's now the athletic director of Boston College at the time, Blake James, he was at the University of Miami. He said, Neal, the only way you're going to get in the game is get back in the game. So I took a job, Blaine, at the University of South Dakota, right? And I'm going to come back to that Crazy Heart story, but I'm going to ad lib a little bit and tell you, because you'll laugh at this. So I told people, here I am in South Florida. I'm going to South Dakota. My name really isn't Neal Bendesky. I'm part of the witness protection program. Why would I move from South Dakota to South Florida, South Dakota? So people laugh. And then another dear friend of mine had a rib place. And I said, here I am over 400 pounds. I said, my goal is I want to be the president of the Anorexic Society. But I ate too many of Jerry's ribs, at his spot. So, like we all have our local spot, and Vermillion, South Dakota has a few of those. But I learned about having a support group. So many times when people are trying to get motivated, they think they got to do it on their own. But in my case, I needed a foundation of people. I needed to be motivated. So at the end of the day, here I am in South Dakota, some great people that are there. I'm getting motivated. So at the same time, I'm like, man, where am I going to go next? What's going to happen? So I'm about 57 years young. And there's this movie, Jeff Bridges won an Oscar for it. You remember it, called Crazy Heart. And he was in that movie a drunk. He was, not a good dude. Well, what attributed to my weight gain being over 400 pounds? I was a binge eater. So, there was a parallel there. He, through his manager, because he was really at the bottom of his life, he's living in Houston, Texas at the time. He writes a song for then who was the great star. My wife just walked in, and if I say the name, she'd love it because her favorite is Colin Farrell, right?
Okay.
So Colin was the star. So he wrote a song for, The Weary Kind for Colin Farrell. So he then did a warm-up for Colin at a concert where? In Phoenix. Where do I live? Phoenix. Okay. So, think about it. Binge eater. He writes a song. I write a plan. He performs in Phoenix. I live in Phoenix. And at the end, he goes to pick up his first royalty check because the song was a hit. And bottom line is he goes in to his manager, and his manager gives him, he says, I'm proud of you, all that good stuff. And he says, I told you there was still gas in the tank. So ultimately, that served as a motivation. My family came into a picture. You go.
Yeah. No, well, you are. So I was thinking, so the film helped motivate you a little bit. Before that, had you always been a binge eater?
Yes.
Even as a kid?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're over 400 pounds. You see the film. Then what happened?
I had a job coming here to Arizona to get sponsorships. So there's two parts to this. The first part was we're in St. Louis before we moved here. I'm working at St. Louis University in an athletic department role. And Chris May, the athletic director, he brought in Bob Bodine. So here's the guy that wrote that book. I got to meet him, right? So when I came, before I came here, my son was working at Jet's Pizza. So let me ask you a question. Do you love pizza?
Sure. Just had it for dinner.
Okay, ready? I love pizza, right? Right? So Blaine, I would go to Jet's Pizza where my son was working, and I would get 2 slices of pizza, and I would sneak a third. So one of my pivot points, that's what I call it. We all hope to find one. In this case, Justin, our son, working, and I'm outside. It was a nice spring day, and he comes out with a salad. He says, Dad, I think it's time for a salad. So that served as a pivot point, right? So he ends up doing that. But I come to here to Arizona, answering your question, and it's my job to bring corporate partners in. So I went to this gym that I still go to, over 2,850 classes now in less than 10 years. That's a lot of classes, called Orange Theory Fitness. Okay. I know there's some in the Carolinas for sure. And point is that I went there in the first 5 weeks, I failed. In fact, I'm wearing a 5X top. This is in XL, wearing a 5X top. And there's this little 3-year-old boy, Max. He's sitting there waiting for his mom, to come out. And he looks at me and he says, "Are you Santa Claus?" My first reaction was not PG-13, right? But then I realized that exercise is only 20% of the equation. 80% is nutrition. And I didn't know about that. So, almost 10 years later, I did. And so, it's like you get motivated, you become accountable. That's what, helped me get through that binge eater scenario. And then you sustain it. And until my cancer, I did a really good job for over 7 years, because people used to say two things to me, neither one of them I liked. One of them was I the Jared from Subway? Now,
I'm thinking that exactly. Yeah.
And I actually met the agency guy. I spoke at Ohio University to the students there in sports management. Jim Kaler, my friend, set it up. And I met this guy that made that decision. Initially, they were going to have this country guy, Billy Bob. And this agency guy called up, the Subway at Indiana University and said, "Is it true that this guy ate Subway for a year and lost 100 pounds?" And it was true. They didn't tell the whole story, but nobody knew it at the time. So sight unseen, that they hired, him as the spokesperson. So that was one other thing. The second one was, you remember that show on NBC, The World's Biggest Loser?
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Right. Jill, whatever the trainer was out there. And to me, that's not what this is about. I don't like the D word. I don't like the word diet. Okay. For those people out there, it's really about a lifestyle. And those people that would come there would get the meds and they do the exercise, and it would be, a very short period of time, and they'd lose a lot of weight. But, guess what? That's not really the solution, that people want, out there. So, back to what I was saying about what Justin did, what happened with my little guardian angel, when he asked me if I was Santa Claus, is that you learn in the beginning just to moderate your life. And then you get to other goals and you start to do things. I help clients all the time, not so much as like, I'm not a dietitian. I have a great dietitian from Mayo Clinic, but at the end of the day, Margaret's going to know things. That's my dietitian that I never knew, like I learned from her that, after so many years, the nutrients that I was putting in my body as I got older, they weren't taking them, because as you get older, it's harder.
Well, I was going to ask you back to, you mentioned Margaret. Just shout out, her last name is?
Oh, Margaret Brown.
Okay. And so when you learned from Margaret Brown, I was going to ask you, so you said 20% here, the 80% was how you picked up learning about nutrition, all this other stuff. So you picked it up, you mentioned through Margaret Brown. How did you pick up that knowledge?
Well, I went after that experience at Orange Theory to the trainer, Kyle Settles, and I said, "What do I got to do?"
Right.
And then I started learning, counting my macros. I use this free app, I still do, called MyFitnessPal. And that's how I'm able to keep track of, my proteins, my carbs, and my fats. Those were foreign words to me, and maybe to a lot of people that are listening out there. But truthfully, if you start to read labels, just do that. Just read labels and realize, like if you go to Starbucks, right? And I'm not knocking Starbucks, but, this particular item has 40 grams of protein, but they don't tell you that there's 1,200 milligrams of sodium, and you're only supposed to have a certain amount a day, and that's the kind of stuff that Margaret and other people along the way educated me about. So I learned moderation. I learned the value of stretching, physical therapy, because, it's like a stupid thing. You're in a chair right now. Okay. When you lose a lot of weight, there's a tendency, your body changes, right? I did, and you get up from your chair and you lean on the front of your foot. That creates more strain on your joints. So it's come back from your heels, and you get up like that. So it's like little things that you learn, I've learned, and I've taken seriously, in what I do. Listen, I'd say 75% of the people that go to Orange Theory are 20 years younger than me, but they'll tell you I outwork them.
Well, the shame listening to you is I'm thinking, the things we learn in school, we learn a lot of stuff, but the things you were mentioning before, I never learned that. Nobody ever taught me about protein and carbs and stuff like that. It's never covered in school. And what a shame when you think about it. Things we could really use in life that we don't learn, except if you seek it out on your own.
So Blaine, I'm going to ask you this, okay? Do you remember growing up? What would your mother say to you about when you would sit down at the table and your parents worked really hard to put that food on your table? I mean, we live in a different generation now, but
I think
but I'm talking about what you're talking about, which is the foundation. So what did my mother say? But what did your mother say? Do you remember?
Well, and you might be going here, but one of the things I remember, if you want to get dessert, you're going to eat everything on the plate, and so did you hear that kind of thing too?
No, she would tell me two things.
What?
She would say, Neal, eat everything on your plate, and don't forget to put your napkin on your plate, on your lap, right? So that was part of the jet. But let me tell you, I call this your wellness clock, and it was ticking. My wellness clock was ticking. And at the end of the day, okay, that thing that my mother would say kind of resonated, because think about if you're out there as an audience, okay, and you have kids, grandkids, whatever. Think about the first time that they're playing soccer or, baseball or softball, whatever it is. And it's your turn to bring the snacks, right? And what do you bring? A sugar-based drink, a cookie, and potato chips, right? And then you get older, okay? Now I'm going to throw some terms out there that I'm sure you're familiar with, okay? I don't care if you're in Asheville, North Carolina, Plainfield, New Jersey, it doesn't matter, okay? If you're on it and you're good enough as sports and you play on a team and you win on the road, where's the coach take you to celebrate? Mickey D's or Burger King, right? Real healthy, right? And then you go and you're a good college athlete, okay? You get a smorgasbord. Basically, it's a foundation for failure. So that was me. I'm in sports. I'm working, not on the court, not on the field, but I didn't understand that the fan food that I mentioned earlier, the hamburgers, the pizza, the cheeseburgers, the hot dogs, the pretzels, those aren't good for you. Okay. Now, granted, I heard what you said about your mom, eat what what you had. I mean, listen, when you're not having a whole bunch of money, you might eat spaghetti four or five times in a row. Right. And if you got an ice cream cone, woo, that was a big deal. But big picture is there was a foundation for failure. And I finally, at 57 years young, woke up and realized it was never too late. That's why I wrote the book and titled it that. Because, in that book, Blaine, that I'll show you guys again, this is me at 450 pounds.
Love it.
Okay. So, and then my wife took this picture, when I started running. So here, and a lot of people get this confused in that what I did was a miracle. So let me ask you a question. You're in the theater. Here's another movie for you, because I know you love this stuff. Jim Carrey, Morgan Freeman. Do you remember the movie called Bruce Almighty?
Sure.
Oh, okay. By the way, let me just share. The reason I get so into movies is because what we did in sports was different. We realized that going after the sports dollar was not what it was about. It was about G-rated entertainment, getting families, creating entertainment. So a lot of times on the video boards, we would create, little motivational type things, to get people to laugh, to get excited, cheer for the team, whatever. What was that movie, the broadcast movie where the guy was, I want you to go to your window and I want you to, and you're mad as hell, and open it up and say, I'm mad as hell blah, blah. And then we would lead into let's go Heat or let's go Marlins or let's go Hurricanes, those type of things.
And so, that's what the guy I told you about off the air, one of my favorites, Bill Veeck and his son Mike Veeck.
Yeah.
This whole thing, it was all entertainment, especially getting people who aren't necessarily big sports fans, but to come to a game. Let's go back to the book, though, in our remaining time. So tell about the evolution of the book. When did that start, and when did you get the idea to write the book?
So I'm glad you asked me that question. I love that question. So I have a strategist. His name is Alex Vergara. He was in the beginning stages of developing the Disney Worldwide of Sports in Orlando. Okay. So amateur teams could come. They'd stay at the they stay at the place. They go to the park and they would play on the fields there, which was unique because it didn't exist. Alex gave me this book. It's called Inspire Me. It was blank. He said to me, and this is after I had this miracle run, and I was going back to Bruce Almighty, because I tell people, if you want to see a miracle, you got to be a miracle. And that's what Morgan Freeman, playing God in this movie, Bruce Almighty, told Jim Carrey. And I believe everybody in this audience is a miracle waiting to be unfolded, because that's what we're trying to do here today. Yeah, I'm telling stories, and so are you. But the big picture is we want other people to be inspired that this could be you. Okay. So back to focus is that I'm in a situation where I'm looking at this book and saying, goodness gracious, okay, what am I going to do? So Alex says to me, I'm going to give you 13 words, and I want you to write a script, in this little book. And, so it's like the first one, hearing versus listening. Okay. So how many of us have experienced that situation where you may have heard, but you didn't listen? So in St. Louis, our oldest son, Justin, worked at Jet's Pizza on a Friday night after ordering another slice after eating. I told you the story earlier. So the point is, I took these words and developed, and initially, because after my my big weight loss, I decided to start running. I had a heart attack. So I was motivated to do that. And like I said, I couldn't walk around the block. So I was like, okay, I'm gonna do this. So I get motivated to get involved and do my thing. So I said, I'm gonna run a half marathon. I did 12 half marathons in 12 months. Now, in total, I've done 17. I just did a race on the Las Vegas Strip about 3 weeks ago. It was my 37th race since my heart attack. But at the end of the day, I tell people it's about finish lines, not finish times. Okay, have fun. I'm not going to sit there and say I'm going to go win the race. Yeah, I got medals behind me, to show that I showed up and did the work, because that's another big thing. But you go to these things and you get people understanding. So there's 13 miles and a half marathon. So initially there were 13 chapters in Never Too Late. Then when I got cancer, I felt like 1 in 6 males, 1 in 6 males have some form of prostate cancer or will in their lifetime. So I added a 14th chapter.
So in writing the chapters, talk about the process. So you were going to write the book. Did you sit down every morning for 3 hours and write, or did you write? How did you put the book together?
You'll laugh. Good question. I love that question. I'm a big YouTube video guy.
Okay, sure.
So I would watch McGonaghy and Dr. Rick, Rigsby and different people, the guy that talks about, I think it's goalposts or something along those lines. And I would catch motivational things that they would say, and I would parallel them back to this Inspire Me book. And I started developing chapters. So the chapters were intended to be unique, again, off the top of my head, but, in the beginning, these chapters, hold on, I'm pulling it up in a quick second here, but like one of them was, I hiked Camelback Mountain, and, here in Arizona, and it's really steep. And my son Logan took this great picture of me going up these steps. So here's my chapters. The day I died, that was when I had my heart attack after an interview. One lighter step for mankind, because I always got compared to Neil Armstrong, right? I was the other Neil, right? And my mother took me to see Rocky. Again, these are all things about the theater that I was so excited to be on your show for. And you think about it, he did the steps, at the art museum, where his statue ended up being, as part of his training program. So I lost a lot of weight. So I said, these are lighter steps that I'm taking for mankind. And then a lot of times when you want to see yourself to become something different, I said, if you're Rembrandt, what image would you paint of yourself? Think about that. Where do you want to see yourself? I saw myself losing 199 pounds. I called Bob Bodine after this scenario, the guy that I saw in St. Louis, and he hooked me up with a guy that here in Grand Canyon University, and I met the athletic director, great guy, Mike, and I came away from it. I said, the one thing I don't have that he has is he looks the part. So I called up Bob Bodine after having that goal of 199 pounds. And I said, Bob, I'm going to lose 199 pounds and you're going to be my agent. And this is when I had lost 0. And sure enough, that's what happened. Finding your pivot point. Again, these are all things that are out there.
If I can ask you, how did you come up with the 199 figure?
So if you remember, again, another movie, Bernie Mac, right? So Bernie Mac was in a movie, Mr. 3000, right? Real quick on the story, here he thought, fictitiously, that you had to have 3,000 hits to get into the Cooperstown to Baseball Hall of Fame. So one day, Major League Baseball calls him and took 3 hits from him. So we had 2,997 hits. So the Milwaukee Brewers baseball team were having a bad year. So they decided to do something to attract fans, and they brought him back. He hadn't played in 9-10 years. Okay. He wasn't very good. And he had an ego from the past that carried over to today's world. And that didn't go very well either. He changed. He transformed his personality, his life. And at the end, he comes up at the plate. The star player's at second base. It's a tie game. His last at bat, the last game of the season. He comes up to the dish and he bunts. He bunts. So he sacrifices, but the guy at second base, the star player for that team, was quick enough and scored the winning run. So here he is at 2,999. Blaine, I didn't have 299 pounds to lose. So I said, I'm going to say 199, and that's it. And like a lot of people used to say to me, why didn't you just say 200?
Right.
Because in the beginning, I would do, later I did Never Too Late, but in the beginning I go, never satisfied, because I don't ever want to get to that point where in life you can't enjoy it if you're not satisfied. You got to keep pushing yourself, because you got people around you that rely on you, as a family member, as, the head of your family or whatever it may be. But you put yourself in I call it your Be Better campaign. How can you be determined? How can you be committed? How can you be fearless, to get to that point where you're going to be what you want to be, and you never know what that is. That's why you got to do it one day at a time.
2 final questions, Neal. If anybody wants to get the book, what's the best bet in getting the book?
Amazon.
Okay. And hold it up if you would, the book.
Sure. Thank you.
Okay. So that's Never Too Late. I love how you spelled it. Amazon to get the book. Perhaps more importantly, if anybody wants to reach you, to speak to you, or more importantly, to talk about you coming out their way for kind of a motivational speech that we're going to laugh a lot at, what's the best bet to reach you?
The199guy.com. That's my website.
Oh, I love it. That's a great way to remember, the 199, and that's all contact information, all information about your presentations.
Yes. And by the way, I got 2 final things to hit you with quick. Number 1, okay. So Bob Bodine, I did go back to see him. I went to a family wedding in Austin, and I drove to Dallas where he lives. I went to his country club, and he was writing his second book, 2 Chairs. Blaine, he has this BMW ragtop, and he's pulling away, and he's pointing at his license plate in the back. And you know what it says? 2 Chairs, right? I went home, and I got a license plate, 199 guy.
I love it.
Right? I went right back at him. The second thing is motivation. Thank you for saying that, because that's what I believe, is that It all starts for people out there with your attitude. And attitude is like a flat tire. If you don't fix it, you don't go very far.
If I can ask you then one final question, this book, what's the next book? Do you have a next book in mind?
Yeah, I've started to learn what the impact of this book is. It's like I told you in the beginning. Today, you set me up for a lot of great things, so I appreciate that. I prefer to help people learn how to transform, not necessarily inform. But initially, I think this book informed people. I want to get into like a Be Better, I mentioned this earlier, program to help people realize how they can do it, how we can create solutions, not only for your audience, Blaine, in Blaine's world, but outside of that. Like if I come visit to North Carolina, I'm coming knocking on your door and we're going to go knock them dead, right?
So sounds good. Neal, I'd like to thank you for being my guest on this edition of the Blaine's World Show. And hopefully we'll bump into each other sometime, somewhere down the road. I'd also like to thank my producer, Cappy Tassetti.
She's
and
great.
Again, the goal is to hopefully catch up with you in person one time, man. This was great. Thanks.
Thanks for the time.